The water wasn't just on the seat, it was in it. A deep, dark puddle had soaked right through the fabric and into the foam cushion. Like someone had poured a bucket of ice water on the spot. But there was no bucket, and there was no passenger. One moment, she was there, a silent, dripping figure in my rear-view mirror. The next, she was gone. All that was left was the cold and this impossible, soaking stain. The rain had been coming down for 7 hours straight. A relentless, nasty downpour that turned the city streets into black mirrors. You know how some rainy nights feel cozy. This wasn't one of them. By 2 a.m., it felt like the world was trying to wash itself clean, and you along with it. My name is Leo, and I've been a rideshare driver for 4 years. It's my life. Just a string of brief hellos and goodbyes, punctuated by the slam of a car door. Most nights are a blur of the same faces: college kids, tired business travelers, arguing couples. It's boring, but hey, it pays the bills. This particular Tuesday was dead. The storm had scared everyone inside, and the app had been silent for almost an hour. I was parked under the flickering sign of a laundromat, watching my wipers count the seconds until I could call it a night. Just as I was about to give up, my phone buzzed. One last fare. I almost hit decline. I was exhausted. My eyes felt like sandpaper, and my own bed was calling my name. But the pickup was just a few blocks away, and I was on my way home. One last ride. What's the harm in that? The city looked like the end of the world. Rain hammered on the roof of my car, and the streetlights cast these long, warped halos on the wet asphalt. Steam rose from the manholes like the city was breathing. There was this feeling of being completely alone, like I was the only person left in a drowned world. It was the perfect night for a ghost story. The kind you tell your friends, not the kind you actually live through. Look, I've always been a pretty logical guy. I believe in what I can see and touch. Ghosts, spirits, all that supernatural stuff. That was just stories people made up to explain things they didn't understand. My world was simple. Pick up, drop off, repeat. There wasn't any room for the unexplained between the GPS and the fare total. As I drove, I could already feel myself winding down. I was picturing my end-of-night routine. Kick off wet shoes, throw a pizza in the oven, and pass out on the couch with the TV on. I was thinking about totally normal, boring stuff. I had no idea that in just a few minutes, my entire concept of reality was about to shatter. The rain was getting heavier, smearing the world into a blur of lights and shadows. The address on the app wasn't a bar or a house. It was a street corner. An empty, dark street corner at the edge of the old industrial park. The GPS voice announced, "You have arrived," but I'd arrived at nothing. Just a dead-end corner where a rusty fence met a crumbling brick wall. No bus stop, no storefront, not even an awning for shelter. The only light was a single, flickering street lamp that made more shadows than light. I killed the engine, my thumb hovering over the cancel ride button. It was probably just a glitch. I'd wait the 5 minutes, collect my cancellation fee, and go home. Easy. I just started my mental countdown when I saw her. 1 second, there was nothing. The next, in a single sweep of my wipers, she was there. A figure standing perfectly still just outside the glow of the streetlight. At first, she was just a dark shape, but then details started to come into focus. It was a woman, soaked to the bone. Her long, dark hair was plastered to her face, and her dress, a simple, pale thing, clung to her. She wasn't trying to flag me down. She was just standing there, waiting, like she knew I was coming. A shiver went down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the cold. Every instinct in my body was screaming, "Drive away." This felt wrong. The empty street, the storm, the woman's creepy stillness, it was a whole checklist of red flags. My hand gripped the gear shift, but then logic fought back. She's just someone caught in the storm. Her phone's probably dead. She just needs help. What kind of person would I be if I left her here? Taking a deep breath, I told myself I was being paranoid and flashed my headlights. She didn't move. I rolled down the passenger side window, and a blast of cold, damp air filled the car. It smelled like rain and wet soil. "Are you my pickup?" I called out, my voice sounding weak against the storm. She didn't answer for a long moment. Then she started to move. She didn't really walk. She sort of glided. Her feet made no sound on the pavement. She opened the back door and slid inside. The door closed with a soft thud, sealing us in. The dome light flickered on for a split second, long enough for me to get a good look at her, then went out. The image was burned into my brain. Her face was so pale it was almost translucent, and her eyes were huge and dark, like they soaked up all the light. She didn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. The cold that came in with her was something else. It was a deep, penetrating chill that the car's heater, blasting on high, couldn't even touch. Water dripped from her hair and clothes, forming a little puddle on the floor mat. The sound was so clear, soft, rhythmic, plink, 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 plink against the roar of the rain outside. "Where are we headed?" I asked, trying to sound normal and professional. She was silent for an uncomfortably long time. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but her reflection was just a ghostly shape. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut right through the noise of the storm. "Blackwood Lane," she said, number 14. I typed it into the GPS. Blackwood Lane. I've lived in this city my whole life, driven these streets for years, and I'd never heard of it. The GPS seemed to glitch for a second before it finally found a route. It was way on the other side of town, out in the old county lands, near a big patch of undeveloped forest. A place everyone forgot about. Got it? I said, trying for a cheerful tone. About a 20-minute drive in this weather. She said nothing, just kept staring ahead, a silent, dripping statue in my back seat. As I pulled away from the curb, that bad feeling came back with a vengeance. It felt like a block of ice in my stomach. I told myself it was just the storm, the weird passenger, the late hour. I was just tired. But some deep, primal part of my brain was screaming that I had just made a huge mistake. I had let something into my car that I shouldn't have. That 20-minute drive felt like the longest of my life. The familiar city streets turned into winding country roads with dark, dense woods on either side. The rain was a solid wall of water that my high beams could barely cut through. It felt like driving down a tunnel that was closing in on you. The only sounds were the storm, the hypnotic swish of the wipers, and that soft, maddening drip, drip from the back seat. I tried to make small talk a few times, mostly just to put myself at ease. "Nasty night," I said, flicking my eyes to the rear view mirror. "Good thing you got a ride." Nothing. Her reflection was just a pale, unmoving blur. Her stillness was just wrong. Passengers always fidget. They check their phones, look out the window, something. She just sat there, perfectly straight, like she was carved from ice. A few minutes later, I tried again, headed home. After a long pause, she answered. Her voice was still a whisper, but it sounded so sad. "I've been trying to get home for a very long time." The words just hung there in the air. It wasn't a normal answer, and it made my skin crawl. I glanced in the mirror again, and for a split second, I swore her eyes met mine. They were just dark, bottomless pools of sadness. I snapped my head back to the road, my heart pounding. The vibe in the car got even weirder. The cold that came off her didn't go away. It got worse, seeping into the seat. I could see my own breath fogging up in front of me, even with the heater on full blast. The windows started steaming up with this weird, greasy film that just smeared when the defroster hit it. And then came the smell. Underneath the scent of rain, something else started to creep in. It smelled like damp earth, wet leaves, and something else, like river mud. The smell of a place that hasn't seen the sun in a long, long time. The radio, which had been playing some low pop station, suddenly burst into static. I tried to change the station, but it was just hissing white noise all across the dial. I just turned it off, The silence that followed felt even louder and more threatening. My logical brain was trying its best to keep up. The cold, a draft. The radio, storm interference. The smell, she was standing outside for a while. But every explanation felt weak, like a cheap shield against the growing feeling that something was very, very wrong. The GPS took me down roads that got narrower and more run down. Pavement turned into gravel. The trees crowded in so close, their branches scraped against the roof like bony fingers. This wasn't a neighborhood. There were no houses, no driveways, no mailboxes. Nothing but woods and rain. Are you sure this is the right way? I asked, my voice shaky. There's nothing out here. Keep going, she whispered. It's not much further. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I felt like I was being watched. I mean, really watched. I didn't have to look in the mirror. I could feel her eyes on the back of my head. It felt like we weren't just driving across town, but away from the real world entirely. Finally, the GPS said, in 200 feet, your destination is on the left. I slowed down, squinting into the darkness. To my left, there wasn't a house. There was a pair of old, rusted iron gates hanging off stone pillars, and beyond them, I could just make out the faint, ghostly shapes of headstones. The destination wasn't a house. It was a cemetery. I stopped the car, engine idling, my brain short-circuiting. My blood ran cold. This was either a horrible prank or some kind of terrifying trap. I spun around in my seat, my heart about to beat out of my chest, ready to demand an explanation from whatever was in my backseat. This is a cemetery, I stammered, my voice barely there. I turned my head and looked right at the back seat where she was sitting. It was empty. My brain just shut down. I stared at the empty seat for a good 10 seconds, trying to make sense of it. She was gone. I hadn't heard a door open or close. We'd been moving the whole time. It was impossible. People don't just disappear. But the proof she'd been there was undeniable. The air was still freezing, and it still had that weird, musty smell. And the seat was soaked. A dark, wet patch stained the fabric in the exact shape of a person. A puddle of water glistened on the floor mat below. I couldn't breathe. I reached out a shaky hand, my fingers hovering just over the wet spot. It was real. I could feel the cold coming off the damp cloth without even touching it. She was here, and now she wasn't. Raw panic just exploded in my chest. My only instinct was to get the hell out of there, to slam the car in reverse and drive away from this place, away from the iron gates and the tilted headstones and the impossible empty seat. But I was frozen. A horrible, morbid curiosity kept me there. Who was she? What was she? My eyes were drawn to the cemetery gates. I could barely make out the name on one of the pillars. Blackwood Memorial. Before I could stop myself, I pushed my door open. The logical part of my brain was screaming at me, but I didn't listen. I had to know. If I just drove away, this would haunt me forever. I needed some kind of answer. I stepped out into the howling wind and rain. A section of the low stone wall next to the gate had crumbled, leaving a gap just big enough to slip through. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, its beam cutting a weak, shaky path through the dark. I stepped through the gap and into the cemetery. The ground was soft and muddy. Other than the storm, the silence was total. The silence of a place that was long forgotten. I walked slowly, the flashlight beam jumping across old, weathered tombstones. Names and dates were worn smooth. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just felt this pull, like the answer was here somewhere. My light fell on a smaller headstone, tucked under the branches of an old oak tree. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my ears, and pointed the light at the inscription. My blood turned to ice. The name on the stone was Ilara Vance. Below the name were the dates, 1905 to 1925, and under the dates, a single, heartbreaking line, lost in the storm, still finding her way home. But that's not what made me gasp and stumble back, dropping my phone. Tucked at the base of the tombstone was a small, black and white photograph, sealed in plastic. It was the face of a young woman with large, dark, sorrowful eyes and long, dark hair. It was her. It was my passenger. I honestly don't remember driving home. That whole part of the night is just a terrifying blank. I must have scrambled back to my car and somehow found my way back to the city, but I have no memory of it. The next thing I remember is standing in my dark apartment, soaking wet, with the keys still gripped in my hand. The front door was wide open. I was just standing there, shaking. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face from that photograph. I heard her whisper, "I've been trying to get home for a very long time." I could smell the rain and the mud. I felt that deep, unnatural cold. The world had always seemed so solid and predictable. Now it felt thin, like a curtain that could be ripped open at any second. The next day, I tried to rationalize it. It was a prank. It had to be an insanely elaborate, cruel prank. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. How could anyone vanish from a moving car? How could they have known which gravestone I'd look at? My car was the only real proof. I went down to the garage the next morning, half expecting the wet patch on the seat to be gone, just a product of my imagination. But it was still there, a dark, undeniable stain on the fabric. It hadn't dried at all. It was still cold and damp to the touch. I spent hours scrubbing that seat, but the watermark never really went away. It's still there now, a faint, ghostly outline, a permanent reminder. I couldn't let it go. A few days later, I went to the local historical society. With shaking hands, I looked through old newspapers from the 1920s. It didn't take long to find her, Lara Vance. Just a small, tragic story. On a stormy night in October 1925, almost 100 years ago to the day, she was walking home when she was caught in a flash flood on that same county road. They found her body days later. The article said she was on her way to her family's home on Blackwood, Laina, small community that was abandoned decades ago. The cemetery is all that's left. I'd heard the stories before, the vanishing hitchhiker urban legends. I always thought they were just that stories. Now, I'd lived one. I gave a ghost a ride on the anniversary of her death. I sold the car a week later. I couldn't sit in it anymore. Couldn't stand seeing that stained, empty seat in the rearview mirror. I quit my job, too. I couldn't imagine picking up another stranger in the dark. I know my story sounds crazy, like something out of a horror movie, but it happened. Have you ever had an experience you just can't explain? A moment where reality just didn't feel right? Let me know in the comments. It's been months, but the fear hasn't really gone away. It's just this quiet, cold spot in the back of my mind. I feel like a stranger in my own life, haunted by the memory of that silent, soaking passenger. I don't drive at night anymore, especially when it rains. The sound of a storm used to be comforting. Now, it just fills me with dread. Sometimes, late at night, I think about her. Elara, the girl lost in the storm, forever trying to get home. And I wonder if she ever made it, or if she's still out there, waiting on that dark, forgotten road in the rain. For the next driver, kind enough, stupid enough, to stop and give her a ride. All I know for sure is that some people are still on a journey, even after they're gone. And sometimes our world is just a quick stop on their way.